Hello, and welcome to A Peace and Podcast. This is the podcast where you get to listen to the young adult novel of Peace and Precipitation, episode by episode, chapter by chapter, and then you get a little bit of the commentary, some of the little inside information, all right, about some of the writings and commentary of the book and whatnot. So, in chapter 8, our chapter is going to be about the finally auditioning for the school play. I know I announced that like 2 episodes ago, but I was wrong. It is chapter 8. It was not those times. So yeah, it is now that. So I've done a little bit of acting myself in the theater. I don't know why I just said it like a weirdo, but in the theater. And yeah, did mostly small scale stuff, one act kind of things. I've done a couple of full-scale productions and whatnot. So I do have some background in that, but I just wanted to write Jen as just a student that wanted to be involved in that. So it definitely is a big part of the story as time goes on, and it is going to be interesting. So without further ado, we are going to start reading Chapter 8. Chapter 8. Thursday's auditions were in the school's auditorium. Hemlock Ridge High School was built in the 1950s and was fortunate enough to have a full auditorium. Many newer area schools had multi-purpose areas that were used for everything: theater, indoor soccer, pep rallies, mass food consumption, etc. Although the school was far from chic with its dated black, white, and mint green color scheme, and not always very clean interior, Jen thought it was nice to have a separate gym, cafeteria, and auditorium. Jen's friend Britta went to Jefferson High School. Britta's school, which was much newer and nicer as a whole, had to utilize the same open concept space for the theater with rows of chairs that rolled in. While the chairs were nice, it seemed it was still the same place that students ate lunch, complete with the sticky floors and awful acoustics, their productions of Guys and Dolls. The only sound that annoyed Jen more than the acoustics was the noise from her sticky floor cleaned to the soles of her shoe. As Jen was leaving, she heard a parent complaining about the production's acoustics, and another quip, "Yeah, luck had an echo tonight." As Jen briskly walked to the hardwood door with the greenish-bronze patinaed handle, she glanced in and saw a few students talking and laughing with Miss Collins, the new theater department teacher. It was only a few minutes until tryouts, and there was no sign of Morgan. At first glance, Miss Collins looked very young. If it not for her business attire, she could pass for a high school student. Jen was a little jealous of students who had study hall 8th period and were able to come and talk to the new theater teacher. A few of the more popular kids were already laughing and joking with Miss Collins. It seemed a little unfair that they got to meet the theater teacher and make a good impression. Jen felt like an outsider since they were already all buddy-buddy with her. Jen was ready for Morgan to arrive so they could introduce themselves. Morgan was running late. Jen walked back up the slight grade of the auditorium aisle to the hallway to look for Morgan. Her eyes scanned the end-of-school crowd gathering near the glass enclosure separating the slightly newer part of the school building with the older original building. Jen finally caught Morgan talking to a thin but tall boy with sandy brown hair, wearing a lime green t-shirt that said, "Party hard, YOLO." Jen smiled when she saw him. It was obvious he liked Morgan, but he was trying to play it cool. Jen watched for a minute while the boy Morgan was talking to nodded his head slightly upward as if to show he was cool stuff. After the boy left, Morgan stood there talking to Zoe Davidson. Jen glanced at her watch and saw it was almost time for play tryouts to begin, and walked towards Morgan to tell her it was time for the audition. "Morgan, who was that?" Jen said with an excited smile. "Garrett Williams," Morgan said with a charmed expression. "Oh, hey, Zoe," Jen said, not wanting to be rude to Zoe. Zoe looked up from her iPhone just long enough to say, "Hey," and nod before looking back down. "But hey, Morgan, let's go. It's time for the play tryout. Are you ready?" "Oh, I'm not going," Morgan said, giving a quick glance to Zoe. "What? Why?" "Because I don't want to be in the dumb school play." "What? Why?" "Morgan, we always dreamt of being in high school musicals. You just said 2 weeks ago that you were excited for the tryouts." Well, this isn't even a musical. It's some weird random play. Yeah, it looks seriously lame, Zoe added. Jen started to give Zoe a dirty look until she caught herself. Yeah, but if we're in this play, it'll help ourselves for the real musicals later this year or next year. The new drama teacher will know us and we'll have the inside track. Yeah, I just don't think I care that much about it, Morgan responded with a shrug. Jen looked at Morgan with a look equally perplexed and hurt. Morgan noticed the look and added that she was sorry before Zoe changed the subject. Did Garrett text you yet? No, not yet, but he is seriously cute. Yeah, and he's like best friends with Drake, too. OMG, he just texted me. He wants to know if we want to go to the movies tomorrow as a group. Yeah, let's go. It'll be okay with your mom, right? Oh, yeah, she'll be totally fine, Morgan said with conviction. As her eyes glanced up from her phone, Morgan noticed Jen still standing there listening with a look of annoyance. Sorry, Jen, we gotta go. Maybe like next play or next year. Okay, bye, Jen said with a little more breathy than normal, as if she were sighing as she spoke. Bye. Morgan and Zoe both answered, still staring at their iPhone screens as they walked away. It may have been jealousy of Morgan's new friend Zoe, or the fact that Morgan and Jen had been planning on trying out for high school plays for years, and now, to use Morgan's term, she flaked out on Jen. Whatever the reason, instead of feeling depressed, she was just angry. Jen walked aggressively to the auditorium, where it looked like Miss Collins was starting to round people up to have the pre-audition meeting. Miss Collins sat on the old but well-lacquered wood stage, so she had a higher altitude than the students. All right, students, I want to welcome you to the preliminary auditions of Identities, our school's fall production. I am Miss Collins, the new theatrical production director of Hemlock Ridge High School. I will be supervising auditions and will be working with a committee to make the final decision on who will be part of our fall production. I expect all auditionees to realize that although this is a high school play, I expect a certain amount of professionalism. Many of you may not be ready for that, so do not be surprised if you are not chosen for the play. Jen didn't think that the way the young teacher fraternized with some of the older students really shouted professionalism. And with that, auditions will begin. Freshmen first, meet me on stage left. All the other students, please wait in the audience seating. Jen's anger and drive to do well in the play tryouts quickly fade to anxiety. Miss Collins beckoned the group of freshmen around the front of the stage to the short stairs of what would be considered stage left. Miss Collins carried a small navy-colored notebook with white polka dots and gold accents. She sat down near a triangular dent in the wood next to a bronze electrical outlet cover. Miss Collins asked the students to sit in a circle on the floor with her. Okay, I will give you a line to say, and I want you to read it with feeling. Just read the lines? Asked a girl with curly hair who was in Jen's 9th grade college prep English class. Yes, but with feeling, answered Miss Collins, in a way only a drama teacher could. Miss Collins passed out half sheets of paper at random. Jen glanced down at hers, and it said, They tell me everyone is important, but sometimes I just don't feel like it. I feel like nothing. Sometimes I just sit alone in my room and cry. Jen's eyes widened at the oddly depressing sentence. This is what they want me to say? What kind of play is this? Just read the lines in the paper. Each are lines from the actual parts of the play. We'll start with the young lady on the left here. What's your name, sweetie? Miss Collins said, pointing to a girl with curly hair. Carrie. Okay, say your part, Carrie, with feeling. Sometimes my life seems so hopeless, I don't know where to turn, Carrie said in a peppy and almost cheerful way, causing the other 8 freshmen and Mrs. Collins to stare at her with an almost identically puzzled look. Carrie smiled back, somehow not realizing the contradictory way in which she read her lines. Okay, thank you, Carrie. Okay, next, your name? Miss Collins said, turning to Jen. Jen was surprised that Miss Collins had called on her, despite the fact that Jen sat directly to the left of Carrie, and they were going in a circle. Suddenly, a nervous pain hit Jen's left side. Jen? Okay, Jen, just say your line. Jen hesitated. They tell me everyone is important, but sometimes I just don't feel like it. I feel like nothing. Sometimes I want to sit in my room and cry. She was so nervous that her that her words fell out, each seemingly more uncertain than the last, till her voice almost shook by the last word. Jen sighed and immediately wished that she could have done her lines better. Brilliant! Absolutely brilliant! That was exactly how I envisioned that part being done. Great job, Jen. And what's your last name? Jen's eyes widened. Morris, Jen said with a little more confidence. Miss Adams jotted a quick note in her notebook. Class, that is how you put feeling into a part. You have to feel the part, be the part, make love to the part until you are in perfect union with the part. Notice the emotion Jen put into that part. She made it seem like she really doesn't feel important. When you act, you need to convince your audience. She convinced us that she doesn't feel important. Great job, Jen. Jen shook her head slightly and tried to hold back a slight smile, both to Miss Collins' positive response to her reading and the copious amounts of enthusiasm in which she expressed her positivity. The irony was not lost on Jen that she was being praised for pretending to be unimportant when she really just felt unimportant with no pretension. Jen shook her head slightly and smiled again. The rest of the students said their parts without much fanfare. Only the lines Jen and Carrie read were from the same character. The other students said their various parts with minimal reaction from Miss Collins. Jen kept replaying what Miss Collins had said to her in her head, still surprised at the serendipitous way that she was able to say her lines. The tryouts ended, and Jen was still trying to hide a smile. And that was Chapter 8. So we have Jen finally doing her audition. So obviously she did really well in her audition, maybe even better than she thought. You know, the funny thing about auditioning for anything or trying out for anything is that sometimes you can give a better or worse impression of yourself. You know, you might be like a halfway decent at something, but if you don't do well in the audition, you can be automatically, you can be, excluded. There's been tryouts that I've done that did not go well, not made it. And there's other tryouts that I did pretty good at. I was able to get the part or be on the team or whatever. So it really can depend on it. So here Jen is, maybe in this case, maybe she gave the impression that maybe she was slightly better actor than she was. I have a friend that said that they hate tryouts because it's one of these things that a lot of times tryouts, they're so subjective that a lot of times people just go with like their gut and like go with the person that they like more. That's a lot of times kind of how they did, or they feel a certain way. And if you have impressions of stuff like that, but it's hard, because not everyone can be involved in everything, and there's also room for development and different things like that. So, but yeah, so Jen tried out for the play, and it sounds like maybe from the teacher's response that maybe she made the tryout and that she will be part of the school play. So it'll be interesting to hear. So whenever I was writing this, and I kind of writing a little bit more about like the high school and everything, I definitely picture Geneva High School circa the late 1990s. Yes, I'm super old that I went to high school in the 1990s. Yep, not even this millennia. But it is true. So I always picture this. So I always picture like Geneva High School, and even the description, I think probably in some ways, I think I mentioned the term glass enclosure. So that was totally a Geneva High School thing, where Geneva High School had this like really old part of the building, and then they also had like an older part of the building, but it was like a newer old part, which is funny. Is they had a part that was from like the 1950s, and then they had a part of the school that was probably from the 70s or 80s, like early 80s. And the funny thing is that actually the 70s and 80s part actually looked older and not as nice as like the 50s part, because they kind of like made it a little bit more traditional, like stone and like brick and like tile, versus the newer part was like weird plastic and like just it looked like it was harder to like clean or something. Weird like opaque windows that just kind of looked dirty. They didn't really look like they were trying to be opaque. But yeah, some of the things in some of the descriptions was definitely Geneva High School. One of the other things about it too was the talk about the auditorium. So and I'm starting to see maybe a little bit of a return to like having auditoriums and different things. But for a while, one of the popular things that schools were doing is they'd have these big multi-purpose rooms that was like doing everything. Like you did held everything in there. And I remember my one friend that went to Madison High School. I went to one of her plays there, and they had like this weird like auditorium. It was like kind of small and like weird. And they had this like multi-purpose room that had all this different thing. And then this other high school that I know, I think even the newer Geneva High School had like a weird one where they kind of pulled out seats or something, or I don't know. Maybe they just did that for a while or whatever. Or maybe I'm thinking of a different school at this point because I've done a lot of substitute teaching in my day and everything. So, might be thinking of a different place altogether. But that was a trend for a while. Is that just they'd have these weird multi-purpose rooms, which just kind of sucked because they're kind of like not very good at anything. Not a great cafeteria, not a great gym, not a great place for the theater. So having an actual like auditorium is pretty nice, and it's one of the nicer things about sometimes old schools, because sometimes in old school sometimes they're very well built at one point, and then maybe newer schools maybe have tighter budgets and aren't able to they're maybe not as nice as they would otherwise be. So that's definitely one of the things that was definitely on my mind when I was writing this, because I was picturing like auditioning for, I don't even remember my auditions for like the musical I was in once upon a time in high school. I don't remember my auditions at all, actually. Maybe I do. I think it was in a choir room. We had to like sing something, but it was like a group, so you just had to not sound terrible. I don't know. I don't really remember. I think we would read some lines or something, but I don't know. I barely remember that at all. Anyways, so another aspect of the story that I want to kind of touch on a little bit was at the beginning of the chapter, where all of a sudden now we have a little bit more distance between Morgan and Jen, as now, according to Jen, they had been talking about for a long time. They always wanted to be in like musicals and like plays and stuff. And they were excited to do it in high school, and now like sounds like her friend like Zoe kind of like talked her out of it and stuff, so maybe it was a thing where Morgan was kind of nervous about it anyways, / unsure, and then you have this one friend that she's becoming good friends with, and the friend like talks her out of it, kind of thing. Oh, it's stupid. Oh, really? You're gonna be in the play? And then she just doesn't quite she doesn't really quite like get over it and do that. So we start to see a little bit more of Morgan and Zoe together, which unfortunately is just something sometimes happens in relationships, and especially in high school, everybody's kind of going their own way and still discovering themselves and everything. So it's a tricky time, and it's hard sometimes for some of the relationships to last. I mean, it's always cool to have friends that you actually do have some friends until a couple of years ago that were like from elementary school and like middle school and high school. And then even then, I feel like we've sort of drifted away in the last 10 years, but I was definitely like still friends with them like into my like 20s, like late 20s kind of thing, from elementary school kind of thing. So it's cool to have those people around, but sometimes relationships are one of those things that sometimes they don't last forever, as sadly as that might be. But we'll have to see what is going on with the next time for Miss Jen, which brings us to chapter 9, and this is a time where we have a little bit more distance from there, a little bit more Jen feeling distance from her friends. That's kind of continue from this, and then just some kind of loneliness and sadness that kind of comes with that. So it's actually one of my favorite chapters, is chapter 9, where she kind of gets into that and just that feeling of being sad and being left out and everything. So kind of get into that a little bit more before the story continues on. So thank all of you guys for listening. I appreciate it, and you are awesome. Keep up the good work by listening to this podcast. Please, I beg of you, please. No, I'm just kidding. But no, it's good. I'm glad you are. All right. Goodbye.